Okay, let's just jump right in with a thought experiment. Picture this. You take a handful of animals and you release them into a completely barren, cracked earth desert. I mean, no food, no water, and zero human help. It sounds like a death sentence, doesn't it? But what if I told you that just 10 years later, that exact same spot had transformed into a thriving grassland, teeming with life? It sounds impossible, I know, but it's a true story. And it reveals this incredibly powerful principle about how our world is actually built. So welcome to our explainer on the planet's most powerful builders, animals.
So today, we're going to tackle this in 4 parts. First, we'll dive into that incredible desert story. Then, we'll break down exactly how these animal engineers do what they do. After that, we'll get into the core science behind their power. And finally, we'll zoom out and see how this whole principle applies to ecosystems all across the globe.
All right, let's get to it. We're starting with our main case study, heading to a pretty desolate landscape in northern Mexico, where a very small group of animals managed to spark a complete ecological revolution. Just look at this contrast. It's night and day, right? On the left, that's what the land looked like, just an impenetrable crust where basically nothing could grow. Then, in 2009, scientists released just 23 American bison into this wasteland, and they just walked away. A decade goes by, and they come back to the scene on the right. Where it was once all dust, there's now grass. It's a staggering transformation, all thanks to the return of a single animal. But to really understand why this worked, we've got to understand what was lost in the first place. You see, for centuries, North America was home to something like 60 million bison. It's hard to even imagine. But in the 19th century, that changed, and it changed fast. This wasn't just hunting for food. It was a commercial machine. You had hunters on the new railways, literally shooting bison from train windows, often for nothing more than sport. And this wasn't just about greed. It was also a political tool. The U.S. government knew that by destroying the bison, they were crippling the Native American tribes who depended on them. By 1889, there were only 541 bison left in the entire world. And Mexico, well, it lost its last bison completely. This wasn't a hunt. It was a near extermination. And when the bison vanished, the land itself started to die. Without their constant movement, the soil just compacted, turning into a hard shell that water couldn't sink into. So when it rained, the water just washed right off, taking all that precious topsoil with it. The great grasslands became thorny scrub. And then other animals, like prairie dogs, which kept the soil alive with their burrows, they disappeared too. It was like pulling one single thread, and the whole ecological fabric just unraveled. The king of the plains was gone, and its kingdom collapsed. So that sets the stage. We know what happened, but the real question is how? How did the return of just 23 bison reverse decades of damage? Well, let's move into our next section and look at the actual mechanics of how this amazing restoration works. You know, it really comes down to 3 simple but incredibly powerful actions. First, just their movement. As these huge animals walk for miles every day, their hooves act like little plows, constantly breaking up that hard-caked soil. This allows air and water to finally get back into the earth. Second, they're basically mobile fertilizer factories. Everywhere they go, they're leaving behind nutrient-rich dung. And third, there's this behavior called wallowing, and this is where things get really, really cool. Now, before we get to the wallowing, let's look at the hard data on that fertilizing effect. Researchers have found that soil in areas where bison live has up to 40% more nitrogen. And as you know, nitrogen is absolutely essential for plant growth. So the bison aren't just walking around. With every step, they're actively pumping life back into the soil. Okay, so what exactly is wallowing? It's basically when a bison rolls around on the ground. To us, it might look like they're just playing or scratching an itch, but what they're actually doing is performing complex ecological engineering. Seriously, the action scrapes away thorny shrubs, clearing a patch of earth. Their huge bodies create a shallow depression, which becomes the perfect little basin to capture and hold rainwater. Then, seeds they've carried for miles in their fur fall off into this moist, protected little seedbed and start to sprout. And just like that, this simple depression becomes a mini ecosystem, attracting insects and birds and kickstarting a whole new patch of life. Now, this ability for one animal to have such a massive, outsized impact on its environment, it's not unique to bison. In science, there is a name for this, and that brings us to our third section, the keystone principle. A keystone species is, well, it's exactly what it sounds like. Think about the keystone in a stone arch. It might not be the biggest stone, but if you pull it out, the entire arch collapses. The bison is a perfect textbook example. Its presence is fundamental to the health and stability of the whole environment, supporting a huge web of other life. So let's trace this chain reaction. The bison come back, and the grasslands they engineer begin to recover. This allows the prairie dogs to return. Their constant digging aerates the soil even more and creates this huge underground network of tunnels. And this is where the chain reaction really kicks into high gear. The black-footed ferret, a species that eats almost nothing but prairie dogs, can now survive. Then you have burrowing owls, who don't make their own nests, moving into abandoned prairie dog burrows. One species literally paves the way for the next and the next.
And the links in this chain are incredibly tight. I mean, get this, a single family of black-footed ferrets needs to eat around 250 prairie dogs a year just to survive. This is not a casual relationship, it's a life or death connection. No prairie dogs, no ferrets. No healthy grasslands for the prairie dogs, which means no bison. It's all connected.
So this whole principle isn't just about the American plains. All over the world, you can find keystone species shaping their environments in these profound ways. Let's move to our final section and see how this ripple effect plays out in totally different ecosystems.
Let's compare a few heavy hitters. In India, elephants are the engineers of the forest. By knocking down trees, they create clearings that let sunlight reach the forest floor, which lets new plants grow. And as they travel, they disperse seeds over huge distances in their dung. In that same forest, the tiger plays a completely different, but just as vital role. As a top predator, it controls the populations of herbivores, which brings us to our next big idea.
It's called a trophic cascade. This happens when you add or remove a top predator, like a tiger or a wolf. It doesn't just affect their direct prey. It triggers this massive domino effect that cascades all the way down the food chain, changing the entire structure of the ecosystem. And probably the most famous example of this happened in America's Yellowstone National Park.
So for most of the 20th century, Yellowstone had 0 wolves. They'd been hunted out of the park by 1926. And without their main predator, the elk population just exploded. They would stand around in one place, especially along the rivers, and eat everything right down to the dirt. The plants vanished, the riverbanks started eroding, and animals like beavers, who needed those plants, disappeared. But then, in 1995, wolves were brought back. And they didn't just kill some elk. They changed elk behavior. And this led to one of the most incredible statements in all of modern ecology. The wolves changed the behavior of the rivers. How on earth is that possible? Well, the elk, now terrified of being ambushed, stopped hanging out in open valleys and along riverbanks. This let the trees and shrubs grow back. Those plants stabilized the riverbanks, which narrowed the river channels and created new habitats for beavers, songbirds, and fish. The wolves literally reshaped the physical geography of the park. And this gets to the crucial point. It's not just about who eats who. Fear itself is a physical, ecological force. The simple presence of a predator keeps the herbivores moving. This constant movement prevents them from totally destroying any one area, which gives the entire landscape a chance to breathe and recover. So in a way, predators engineer their environment by managing the behavior of their prey. Which brings us to our final takeaway here. An ecosystem isn't just a random collection of plants and animals. It's a deeply interconnected web. And as we've seen with the bison and the wolves, the elephants and the tigers, pulling on or reintroducing a single thread can cause the whole structure to either fall apart or, miraculously, rebuild itself. And that leaves us with one final, vital question to think about. We often think of extinction as the loss of one type of animal. But if that animal is an engineer, a keystone species, a critical thread in the web, what are we really losing? We aren't just losing an animal, we're losing the entire world that it builds.